But no one, not even the laughing lawyers, had the faintest idea just how much. Before he ever stood in that courtroom, before the laughter and the silence, there was a boy in a rusted wheelchair waiting behind a laundromat in East Briar. His name was Malik. He was 17, wrongly accused of theft, and had no one left to speak for him, except for Thomas McCullen. Years. Ergo, Thomas had driven 9 hours in a dented pickup truck just to deliver a case file, a meal and a folding ramp to Malik's family. No cameras, no news, just quiet resolve. That wasn't unusual for Thomas. He'd done it dozens of times before, and would do it dozens more. It's just who he was. He didn't look like a man who changed lives, but he did. Thomas was the founder and quiet architect of Second Path, a non-profit born from grief and built on defiance. The idea came after his closest childhood friend, Daryl, was wrongfully sentenced for a crime neither of them could pronounce. Thomas watched helplessly as the justice system swallowed Daryl whole and never forgot the silence in his friend's eyes as the cell door closed. That silence became fuel. He gave up a comfortable job in urban planning, sold his apartment, and rented a one-room office above a bakery. That office became a war room. Legal books piled beside mismatched coffee mugs, handwritten case notes on the walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. In less than 5 years, Second Path had quietly overturned 11 wrongful convictions and helped hundreds navigate the maze of re-entry into society. But Thomas never stepped in front of the camera. When journalists reached out, he replied with a single sentence, "It's not about me." His clothes reflected that. His speech, even his posture. If you saw him on the street, you'd never guess he was the mind behind one of the most quietly effective justice initiatives in the state. He liked it that way. Yet today, in this courtroom, the anonymity he cherished had become his cage. No one recognized the stack of documents in his hand, the ones that could unravel a conspiracy. No one recognized him. And worst of all, a part of him began to wonder if they were right. He sat quietly at the defense table, fiddling with a paperclip. He thought about Malik, about Daryl, about all the people he'd fought for, and then he thought something he wasn't proud of. Maybe they were right, maybe I should have just let this go. It hit him harder than the insults, harder than the laughter. He remembered how the case began. It was supposed to be anonymous. A confidential report about shady backdoor deals involving those very lawyers, now mocking him in court. He hadn't even intended to reveal himself, but someone leaked his name, and when he refused to retract. The claims, they turned the system against him. The case became personal, not just for them, but now for him too. And yet, despite everything, Thomas hadn't come to fight. He'd come with hope, a naive hope maybe, that truth still had a place in a room like this. He looked down at his hands, calloused, steady, honest. What am I doing here, he thought. They don't want the truth, they want a spectacle, but deep inside, under the shame and the weariness, something else stirred, something old, something stubborn. He folded the last paper, placed it neatly back in the file and looked ahead. There were no cameras, no allies, just him, and that had always been enough. In the neighborhood where Thomas lived, a cracked, fading corner of the city few remembered to care about, he was known simply as that guy with the notebooks. No one asked what he wrote. No one asked why he walked with a slight limp or why his jacket always smelled faintly of coffee grounds. To most, he was just there. At the corner diner, he sat alone, paid in cash, always left 2 bills more than the check. Once, when a waitress named Jenna was on the verge of losing her apartment, an anonymous envelope appeared in her mailbox. No note, just exactly the amount she needed down to the cent. She never found out it was Thomas, but she remembered the man in the corner seat who tipped too much and said too little. That's how Thomas lived. He slipped through the seams of people's lives, stitching what he could, asking nothing in return. And because he asked for nothing, people offered nothing back. Not recognition, not respect. He had made peace with that mostly. Still, there were moments, like the Tuesday morning 2 weeks before the hearing. A boy on the subway platform dropped a folder, papers everywhere. Thomas knelt slowly, gathered every page, and handed them back without a word. The boy nodded and hurried off. He never saw that one paper had a Second Path logo on it. Thomas had noticed, but he said nothing. Then there was the courthouse janitor, Leo, quiet, wiry, and invisible in the same way Thomas was. He cleaned late nights, spoke only when spoken to, and had a stutter he hated. For weeks, Leo watched Thomas sit in the waiting area, head bowed over folders. One night, curiosity won. You work here?" Leo asked. Thomas looked up, smiled faintly. "Not exactly." They talked, briefly, but something in Leo shifted that night. The next time they crossed paths, Leo brought a sandwich, then a coffee, then a question. "How do you know so much?" "But nobody knows you." Thomas just shrugged. Maybe knowing isn't the point. Leo didn't press, but he started Googling. Late at night after his shift, he typed second path into his cracked phone. The more he read, the more the puzzle pieces clicked. He wasn't sure, but something told him the man with the quiet smile and the tired eyes wasn't just another defendant. In the courthouse itself, another connection began to form. Carla, a young intern working in the archives, had stumbled on an old case file marked Malik J. Simmons. She remembered the name. Her older brother had told her that name once in tears after being saved from prison by someone he never met. She opened the file, found a letter signed by T. McCullen. The name didn't ring a bell until she saw it again, handwritten in pencil, barely legible. On the bottom corner of a folded document, the man in courtroom 3B had dropped. She blinked. Read it twice, and for the first time since she started her internship, Carla couldn't focus on her tasks. She had no proof yet, just a feeling, but sometimes the smallest cracks let in the most light. Thomas returned to the courthouse each day as if it were a ritual, always early, always unnoticed. He'd sit in the waiting area long before the lights flickered on, with nothing but a thermos of tea and a leather-bound folder worn at the edges like an old Bible. Most passed him without a glance. Some whispered, others stared briefly, then looked away. He was a background object, part of the furniture, but not to Leo anymore. Since that late-night search, Leo's gaze had shifted. He no longer saw an old man with a limp and bad shoes. He saw a ledger of stories, of battles fought quietly. He still hadn't said anything, not directly. But one morning, he left a note tucked beside Thomas's seat. Just 5 words. "You're not invisible to me." Thomas never mentioned it. He just nodded the next time they crossed paths, and Leo nodded back. That was enough. Meanwhile, Carla had begun cross-referencing court files with media reports, building a case in her own mind. She kept it secret, didn't want to be wrong, didn't want to be foolish, but she began noticing details. The way Thomas observed everything, the way he held onto certain files. The one time she caught a glimpse of a name on his folder, E. Jordan, a woman whose wrongful imprisonment had sparked protests 3 years ago, and whose release had been credited to an anonymous legal advocate. Carla remembered her brother's voice when he told her, "Whoever saved me didn't want to be found." Now she wondered if she'd found him by accident. Outside the courtroom, Thomas remained as invisible as ever. At the coffee cart, people cut in front of him. At security, guards searched his bag with extra scrutiny. When he dropped his ID once, a clerk kicked it further down the hall without even noticing. But still, he helped. He helped a confused father find the right chamber. He gave his umbrella to a paralegal caught in the rain. He picked up crumpled paperwork others stepped over. And then one day, a small gesture cracked the facade. During a tense lunch hour, a junior lawyer, fresh from law school, panicked and, fumbling, dropped her entire case binder outside the elevators. Papers flew everywhere. No one helped, except Thomas. He knelt, slow and deliberate, and began collecting the pages. As he handed them back, she whispered, "Thank you," then paused. "Wait, this logo, Second Path, I know this." Thomas just smiled faintly. Most people don't. That night, she called her older cousin, a journalist, and asked a question that would echo into the next chapter. Who started Second Path? The next morning, Carla waited near the archives entrance, folder clutched tight in her arms, eyes darting toward the hallway. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe to confirm a theory, or maybe to just see him again. Thomas passed by like always, calm and unreadable. But this time she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said. He paused. "Do you know anything about a non-profit called Second Path?" His eyes met hers, gently, but with a stillness that made her heartbeat stumble. "I've heard of it," he said. She hesitated. "My brother, they helped him once, saved him really." Thomas said nothing for a moment, then nodded. "I'm glad," he replied softly, then turned away before she could ask anything else. But something lingered in that pause. Carla stood frozen for a few seconds, as if some unspoken truth had brushed past her. She didn't need confirmation anymore. She just knew. Across the hallway, Leo watched from a maintenance door unnoticed. He'd seen the exchange. He saw the way Thomas carried himself, the posture of someone used to carrying more than just files. And now, someone else knew. Later that day, something strange happened in the cafeteria. Thomas had paid for his coffee, as always, but this time, when he reached for his usual table in the far corner, someone had already cleared it and left a small thank you note. No name, just a scribbled line. "You helped me once, you don't remember, but I do." Thomas stared at it for a while, not smiling, not frowning, just remembering. The atmosphere around him had shifted, slightly, but noticeably. Senior clerk, who had previously dismissed him, now nodded respectfully. The security officer, who used to ignore him, suddenly asked if he needed anything. Tiny gestures, but after so many years of invisibility, they landed like thunder. Even the lawyers, the ones who laughed, had started to sense something they couldn't explain. One of them, the youngest, lingered longer during recess, watching Thomas more carefully, less mockery, more uncertainty. And behind it all, Carla began printing documents. She was preparing something, not to expose him, but to protect him, because she didn't just suspect anymore. She believed. And belief in the hands of someone with nothing to gain can be dangerous to the powerful. The loop was tightening, threads were converging, and the quiet man everyone ignored was about to become the center of the storm. The courtroom. Door creaked open mid-sentence. The lead attorney paused, annoyed. "We were just about to conclude, Your Honor." But the figure who entered didn't belong to that sentence. He wasn't expected. He wasn't part of today's schedule. And yet, there he was. Judge Harold Whitmore, the senior justice of the district, a name spoken with both reverence and fear in every legal office from here to the Capitol. He walked in slowly, without ceremony. But when he looked toward the defense table, something in the air cracked. His eyes locked on Thomas, and then everything stopped. He turned to the presiding judge and whispered something barely audible. The microphone picked up only fragments. "Misconduct. Authorization. I'll take it from here." Gasps rippled through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. The presiding judge stood pale and gave up her seat. Judge Whitmore took his place. He didn't look at the prosecution. Not yet. He looked only at Thomas. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "do you have your documents with you?" Thomas nodded once and slid the folder across the table. Judge Whitmore opened it, slowly, like a priest unfolding scripture. He flipped through the first page, then the second, then the 12th. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "These documents were submitted to this court 3 weeks ago," he said. "They were stamped, received, and then deliberately buried." The room shifted again, this time colder. The lead attorney opened his mouth to object, but Whitmore raised a single finger. "Sit down." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was surgical. The judge turned toward the gallery. "It's rare that I step into proceedings midstream, but I happen to know this man. Years ago, he handed me evidence that saved a boy named Malik from a life sentence. He didn't want credit then. He won't ask for it now, but I'll give it anyway." He looked back at Thomas, because this courtroom forgot what justice looks like. There were no more snickers. Carla sat frozen in her chair, tears welling in her eyes. Leo stood just outside the door, gripping a mop with white knuckles. Every person who had mocked Thomas was now staring at him like they'd never seen him before, because they hadn't. They'd only seen his shirt, his shoes, his silence, but not the man, not the architect behind Second Path, not the quiet hand that restored broken lives behind the scenes, not until now. And somewhere, deep in the wave of silence that followed, you could feel something shift, not just in the courtroom, but in the people watching, because moments like this, they don't happen often. When they do, you don't forget them. And if this story has stirred something in you, even just a question, you might want to stick around. The truth is just getting started. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, resting, both hands on the bench as if anchoring the room with the weight of his words. "What you all failed to see," he said slowly, "was not just a man. It was a legacy, a movement, a force built on integrity so quiet you mistook it for weakness." He turned the documents so they faced the courtroom and held one up. "This," he said, "is a sworn testimony from a clerk within the prosecution's own office. It details the deliberate omission of evidence, the concealment of witness statements, and intimidation of contributors to the Second Path program, all of which were conveniently left out of the narrative you fed this court." The youngest attorney, the one who had joked about collecting money for a clean shirt, looked like he was shrinking by the second. "Your Honor, Enough," Judge Whitmore snapped. "Your mockery, your laughter, I will be recommending a formal ethics investigation, and I assure you that process will not be quiet." No one made eye contact with Thomas. He hadn't moved. He didn't smile. He just sat there, hands folded, a storm of grace surrounding him. The courtroom, once full of sneers, was now a cathedral of silence, reverent, humbled. In the gallery, Carla wiped a tear with the back of her hand. Her brother's voice echoed in her head again. "The one who helped me didn't want to be known." Leo, still half hidden in the doorway, whispered under his breath, "I knew it." And just like that, not through vengeance or noise, but through truth, Thomas stood taller than anyone else in that room. Whitmore closed the file, then looked directly at him. "You should have never had to be here today," he said. "But because you were, this courtroom just remembered what justice is supposed to feel like." Thomas said nothing, only nodded. Outside, a few reporters had begun to gather, tipped off by whispers of something unusual. One of them tried to approach as the doors opened and Thomas exited. "Sir, can we ask?" The bailiff stepped forward. "He doesn't speak." "To media." Thomas kept walking past the cameras, past the questions, back into the world that had always misunderstood him, but this time a few more people saw him for who he truly was, and it wouldn't be the last time, because truth, once seen, doesn't disappear. In the weeks that followed, silence spoke, louder than headlines. The courtroom incident spread, not through press conferences or press releases, but whispers, retellings, and a single leaked photo. Thomas walking alone through the courthouse doors, folder in hand, expression unreadable. The ethics board moved quickly. 2 of the attorneys were suspended pending investigation. The third, the youngest, resigned before his hearing. No one cheered, no one gloated, and certainly not Thomas. When a reporter cornered him outside the library days later, asking if he had any comment on the outcome, Thomas replied with just 6 words, "I hope they learn from it," and then he walked away. Meanwhile, Carla submitted her findings, not to the press, but to the legal aid office. Her supervisor read every page in stunned silence. "You're sure it's him?" they asked. Carla nodded. "I'm not here to expose him. I just think we could do more because he already has." That same day, she proposed a pilot initiative, the Quiet Counsel program, designed to bring legal literacy into low-income schools, inspired by what she'd learned from Thomas's legacy. It was approved within a month. Leo, for his part, began leaving second path flyers around the courthouse. At first just 1 or 2, then entire stacks. No one told him to stop. Some even took one home. He also changed how he moved through the building. Straighter posture, firmer voice. The stutter was still there, but something else had replaced the shame behind it. Conviction. Back at the diner where Thomas still took his coffee, Jenna, the waitress he once helped without her knowing, sat across from him on her break. "I think I figured it out," she said. Thomas looked up. "You're the reason my eviction never happened." He didn't confirm, just stirred his tea slowly. She smiled anyway. "That's okay," she whispered. "I just wanted to say thanks." Thomas smiled, just slightly. "You were worth it." Word spread, yes, but only where it needed to. Thomas didn't become a celebrity. He didn't publish a memoir. He didn't start charging speaking fees. He just went back to work. The foundation added 2 new branches in underserved counties. Each opened quietly, with no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just a small sign, a desk, and a locked drawer of files that would change lives. He was still the man with the worn shoes and the tired eyes, but now people paused before judging. Not everyone, but enough to make a difference. Some people need applause to feel seen. Thomas McCullen never did. Even as the courthouse began adjusting its policies, even as a new ethics code was printed and posted, in every chamber, no one officially mentioned his name. And that was fine by him. He wasn't interested in being remembered, only in making things easier for the next person who walked through those doors looking like he once did. One of the clerks, the same who had once laughed during the hearing, began volunteering at a local youth legal clinic. She never told anyone why. She just showed up. A paralegal whose briefcase Thomas had once picked up after a spill now ran an internal workshop on empathy and unconscious bias. Her slides never featured his photo, but she quoted him without knowing. And Carla, she transferred to a public defender's office after graduation. On her first day, she found a folded note in her locker. No name, no signature, just a line in simple handwriting. Never underestimate the ones they ignore. She kept it in her wallet. One Saturday afternoon, Thomas sat on a park bench, feeding the pigeons like he always had. A teenage boy sat beside him, nervous, fidgety, hoodie pulled tight over his face. After a moment, the boy asked, "Are you the guy from court?" Thomas didn't answer. He just handed the kid a small card. "Second path. Show up," he said. "We'll help you figure it out. The key." Boy looked at the card like it was a map. Maybe it was. And as he walked away, Thomas remained still, watching the pigeons, watching the city, watching nothing in particular. No headlines followed, no one filmed him, but something had shifted. Justice had been done, not loudly, not violently, but fully. And as the sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows over the street, it was hard not to feel like the world had tilted, just a little, towards something better, because of one man who never needed to be seen, to make others feel visible. You never really know someone until the silence around them starts to speak. Thomas McCullen never asked to be understood. He never raised his voice, never explained the dirt on his shirt or the wear on his shoes. He never corrected the people who laughed, never returned the glare of the clerk who rolled her eyes, never demanded to be seen, and maybe that was the greatest strength of all. Because while the world measured worth by how loudly someone spoke, Thomas was building something quieter and deeper. His life wasn't a performance. It was a vow to carry the broken parts of a system no one else wanted to hold, a vow to believe in people others discarded, a vow to stay small so that others could stand taller. And when the world laughed, when it mocked and shoved and misjudged, he didn't fight back with anger. He waited, and when truth arrived, it didn't need to shout. It simply stood there in a worn jacket and calloused hands and reminded the room, what you see is never all there is. The lesson wasn't about courtrooms or verdicts. It was about us, about the reflex to judge before we understand, about the voices we silence without realizing, about how quickly we decide someone's worth by how much they own, how polished they look, how loudly they speak. But if a man like Thomas could walk through the fire of humiliation with nothing but his dignity intact and still offer a hand instead of a fist, then maybe the rest of us can learn to pause, to look again, to ask ourselves, next time we see someone who looks out of place to whom? Because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who doesn't need to remind you they are. They just are.